Sharia law, is it mentioned in the Quran, and what is it? What's the Sharia law?
Yeah, I don't know if it's mentioned in the Quran. Sharia is a word which, like a lot of Islamic words, it means the pathway to the water well. Okay, because people in Arabia are living in a desert, and Sharia or Shara means the roadway to life, water. So in Islamic usage and terminology, it becomes the road to life. Okay, which is basically, or we can translate it as Islamic law, which is what Muslims must do to be good Muslims. It's the pathway to life. That's what Sharia means. And it's essentially, it's laws. So Islamic law is a very legitimate and fair translation. And it's laws that are based on the Quran. The twin pillars are usually seen as the Quran, and the Sunnah, which is the Hadith and the Sirah, and whatever Muslims think are reliable, authentic teachings by Muhammad as derived from the Sunnah. And based on that and some other things like ijma means, whatever the consensus is. If there's some controversial issue, what do the ulama or the scholars believe? That's also, and they use something called qiyas, which means analogy. So for example, Islamic law doesn't talk about smoking, but it does say don't drink. And because that means don't harm yourself. Mm-hmm. So smoking is also not necessarily haram, it's makruh, which means disliked. Anyway, it's pretty convoluted, but that's all what it is. It's Islamic law.
But they're having right now Sharia trials in Europe. Is that correct?
Sharia trials?
Yeah.
I don't know.
Courts.
Oh, yeah. Yes, in places in Europe, because they have such a large Muslim population, they're giving in and allowing Islamic law to trump native law of Europe, wherever Muslims are, in the name of multiculturalism and diversity and etc. So yeah, but from what I understand, in various Muslim-heavy regions, in I think England especially, they actually have what amounts to Sharia law for Muslims to actually it's for Muslims to judge themselves against each other. So mm-hmm. They allow them to do it through their own courts.
So we're in the year 2025. Where do you think we are at right now, especially Europe, in regards to Islam trying to conquer Europe, mm-hmm. conquer the Western society?
Mm-hmm. Well, I've looked at various Pew polls, and they talk about the demography. What interests me is the demography of the changing face of Europe. Mm-hmm. I always say this, I find it very ironic, but most Western people, they think they're very, unfortunately, they're very centric. They just think of their own civilization. So they look at the West, they look at America, they look at Europe, and they still see the majority are still white people, including in Europe. They don't realize, though, that white people are like about 4% of the world population. So they're a very tiny, tiny minority. 4%. Yeah. Look it up. It's something like that. Of the world. I mean, just think about it.
From 8
just the Indians alone, I think, are 2 billion. And
Correct.
The Chinese are like 2 billion.
Indonesia,
and the Africans. And yeah. So it's a very small minority. And I marvel that it is this tiny minority that feels incumbent upon itself to bring everyone into its land and to suppress its own culture and its own heritage and its own religion in the name of diversity. And it's just amazing to me. It's a sort of suicide. No other country, no other civilization does this, and rightfully so. Why should they? Okay, but I don't know why Europeans feel the need to just flood their lands with, especially when they are such a tiny minority to start with.
You have no explanation to this.
No, I do have an explanation. The explanation is, it's very convoluted, but the easy explanation is the leaders of Europe are intentionally doing this. Whether it's because they're just ideologically compromised or stupid, or whether there's an agenda which is against their own people, which may very well be the case. In England, it's reached the point where you can't even say the truth about what's happening without going to jail.
Literally.
And this is amazing. And this is supposed to be a country. So obviously the rulers of England, whether they are British natives, hate and are warring on their own people. It's just as clear as that. There's no other explanation. But people can't wrap their minds around that. Or in other areas, they keep bringing and importing more and more Muslim migrants, and all you see is more and more violence and criminality. And if you talk about it, you get arrested. So if the people of Europe see this, and maybe they do or they don't, but they're not doing anything about it. They've been very much emasculated and paralyzed, handicapped. And so what's happening today, if this was happening to the ancestors The defenders of the West that I write about, they would have gone to war a long time ago.
A new crusade.
Of course, against their own people, the leaders. But today's Europeans are not going to do that.
But Europe is being conquered right now by soft power, not the hard power.
Exactly.
That's genius.
Of course.
You don't even have to go to war.
Yeah.
They let them in.
Yeah, exactly. You know, the history of Europe has been fighting tooth and nail against Islam to keep it out and killing and sacrificing themselves. And now, after finally winning, they go out of their way to bring them in. And the Muslims that are being brought in, a lot of them are still behaving in the old way, violently, criminality. So it's amazing, you know, it's suicidal. What other way can I explain it? Aisha, his young wife, his child bride, who I believe married when she was 9, though he had possession of her when she was 6, what we would call, then it would be normal. Oh, I'm a Muslim man, I'm 30, I'm 40, and I'm going to marry a 9-year-old. You're going to have 4 wives and as many slaves as you want, concubines. And they talk about how they attacked and killed everyone, and they took a nun and ganged her until she died in front of everyone. And the eyewitness says, and the Turks did this often to pilgrims. Jihad of the pen, jihad of the tongue, jihad of the money, jihad of the womb. And all of them are to serve Islam, to empower it over infidels. And the Muslim is one who submits. But if you really went to it, it was a political thing. I'm superior, I'm the warlord, you're joining me, you're submitting to me in what I say, which comes from God. And that was it. He claims he's from God, but his modus operandi, the way he behaves, is all about violence, warfare, plunder, you know, sexuality, you know, concubinage, etc. England, it's reached the point where you can't even say the truth about what's happening without going to jail. So obviously the rulers of England, whether they are British natives, hate and are warring on their own people.